to speak to Willy Nyamitwe, communications advisor to Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza. He's going to tell us how much damage our UN ambassador, Samantha Power, is doing in Burundi. And that was Sagamba Burundi, which means Shine Out Burundi, by Ngabo Leonsi. Now we're going to speak to Willy Nyamitwe, communication advisor to Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza. He is now in Kampala, Uganda, at an inter-Burundian dialogue that we're told has been organized to end the fighting that began with a failed coup attempt there in Burundi in May. The coup plotters fled, declared war on Burundi from outside its borders, and vowed to topple President Nkurunziza by force. Their complaint was that his party had nominated him for a third term in office, which he went on to win in July. They recently announced that they had taken the name the Republican Forces of Burundi and renewed their pledge to oust the president by force. The U.S. and the EU, and most vocally UN Ambassador Samantha Power, are also demanding that Burundi's president step down, though most stop short of openly expressing support for the armed insurgents. Okay, Willy Nyamitwe, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You are welcome, and thank you for the invitation. And I take this opportunity to extend my greetings and best wishes for the new year to all those who are following us and all those who have an interest to know what is happening in the Great Lakes region, particularly in Burundi.
Let's start with today's headlines. The corporate and state press have generated a slew of headlines about quote-unquote Burundi peace talks. This term, peace talks, suggests that there's a civil war in Burundi and that the warring parties have been brought to the table to negotiate. But anyone who's been following this closely knows that there's an armed insurrection in several neighborhoods in your capital, Bujumbura, not a civil war, but that our government and the European Union want your government to surrender, even though you haven't been defeated. They want you to agree to a regime change, and they want to call it a transitional government. What are representatives of the Burundian government actually in Kampala to do?
Thank you for your question. There's no peace talks in Kampala, the capital of Uganda. The Burundi government delegates came to attend the launching ceremonies of the second part of inter-Burundian dialogue. The first part took place in Burundi, organized by the commission in charge with the dialogue. The launching ceremony took place at the beginning of November in Burundi, and the Ugandan Defense Minister, Honorable Christopher Kiyonga, attended that ceremony in Burundi. So as agreed by the president and other stakeholders, some other sessions have to take place outside the country, since some stakeholders say they fear for their lives and they could not make it or come to Burundi to take part into this inter-Burundian dialogue. So the president, Pierre Nkurunziza, has promised that the dialogue process must take place everywhere, either in Burundi or outside the country, even though only peaceful stakeholders have to be invited, according to the resolution 2248 of the United Nations Security Council that stated clearly that only peaceful stakeholders have to be invited into this dialogue.
But the U.S. and the European Union, which is paying for this get-together in Kampala, wants a lot more than a dialogue. They've made it abundantly clear that they want regime change, which they want to call a transitional government.
We are aware in Burundi that some Western countries are doing their utmost to get a regime change in Burundi or a transitional government. I can tell you quite frankly that Ambassador Samantha Power, the American ambassador to the United Nations, is doing her utmost or has supported all the internal and external dynamics that really worked hard for the legal and legitimate institutions to be violently overthrown. Fortunately, she failed. The rebel movement that called itself Forebu, Force Républicaine du Burundi in French, what can be translated as Republican Forces of Burundi, I can say that it doesn't matter since it cannot have any influence in domestic affairs, domestic policy. And so far, Burundians are used to those announcements of the creation of rebel groups.
Hasn't the Burundian government already survived attacks since the nation's new constitution became the law of the land in 2005?
Many of them, but some of them are created and then disappear by themselves, while others are break up by security forces. So the only thing that can frighten us is the fact that those persons are killing innocent people. They savagely kill, throw the bodies into the streets, take the pictures, and spread them via social media to say that Burundi security forces are killing innocent people.
Are you saying that there's been no excessive force, including killing, by Burundian security forces?
I don't say that there's no one who has been killed by a police officer. This can happen, but globally, what we saw and what we are seeing, all the atrocities are committed by radical opposition leaders, politicians who conceive and implement dishonest plans of killing innocent citizens only because those politicians want to conquer the power away from the elections without going through the ballot. And finally, this is the main goal of the talks that those opposition leaders are calling for.
So you're saying that the opposition is a minority who want to seize power from the elected government, and that minority is committing atrocities, then circulating images of those atrocities on social media and blaming them on the government so as to turn the international community against you and reinforce Western governments' demands for regime change.
Yes.
The press has been reporting that you refuse to attend the continuation of this process, which they keep incorrectly calling the peace talks, in Arusha, Tanzania on January 6th. Is that true?
No. The Burundi minister is misquoted. He did not say that the government will not participate in the further talks. No, it's a matter of some importance to us, to the government of Burundi, to keep open the door for inclusive dialogue. The only thing we rejected here in Kampala is that the facilitation issued a communique stating that all the stakeholders agreed to resume talks on 6th January in Arusha. So the minister has just rejected the formulation because we didn't agree on that date, and we have to consult the capital, Bujumbura, to know which is going to be the next step forward.
So they announced the date and time of the next talks about Burundi without consulting the Burundian government. That sounds really rude. And if I understand this, you're also rejecting the idea that you're supposed to sit down and talk with the May coup plotters and armed groups who've been tossing grenades in Bujumbura, assassinating top political and military officials, and otherwise trying to violently overthrow the government.
Yes, of course, because as I told you, the government of Burundi, the president made it clear that only people who are not being sought by Burundi justice can take part to this inclusive dialogue. And the 2248 resolution from the Security Council of the United Nations said that only peaceful stakeholders will be invited. So it's a principle that we have to respect our sovereignty and to respect the law, the rule of law. Those persons who fled the country because they took part in the May attempt of coup, they cannot come again and say that they have to negotiate. The only place for them is jail, to be caught and brought into justice. They cannot come today and say that they need to negotiate with a legitimate elected government. This is a no-go area.
So if you sat down to talk with those who've been terrorizing the population in Bujumbura and trying to overthrow the government by force, you'd be recognizing their legitimacy, and you're non-negotiable about that. It seems like the Western governments who so frequently say that they won't negotiate with terrorists should be able to understand that, but they're being obtuse. Now, warring armies did come to the table in 2003 to sign the Pretoria ceasefire agreement, and that led to the new Burundian constitution.
Yes, but we have to note one big difference between that time and this time. At that time, we had a coup d'etat, and elected president has been killed. With him, a lot of other politicians and other officials, and we went into a civil war that took more than a decade. So we had to go to negotiate with the government in order to find out a solution for the 10 years civil war. But now it's about people who fear to go to elections, to afford elections, who think they can come back to power via a power-sharing system, a kind of transitional government. So if we allow people to continue doing such bad things, it means even in 5 years, people will fear to go to elections and take weapons in order to come back and negotiate with elected government. So it's a no-go area now. People have to know that we have to move forward, but into democracy.
Okay. Now, the notoriously subservient African Union, which gets more than 90% of its budget from the European Union, has gotten involved. The African Union Peace and Security Council has proposed to send 5,000 quote-unquote peacekeepers to Burundi, whether your government consents or not. And that's 2,000 more than they sent to drive Rwanda's M23 militia out of eastern Congo. What's your response to that?
Yeah, the Department of Peace and Security of the African Union recently decided to deploy a minimum of 5,000 troops in Burundi. They said the main goal is to protect civilians and prevent a genocide. But the people of Burundi have said no through the members of parliament and through protest rallies organized in the 18 provinces of the country. So the government of Burundi also refused. But personally, I really find it ridiculous to send 5,000 troops in a peaceful land only because the European Union and some other Western countries decided so and are doing everything they can to get it done by African Union, our own organization as Africans.
And what about their argument that they're compelled to do this to prevent another genocide?
They are building their argument from a very wrong theory of genocide. Frankly speaking, the situation in Burundi does not warrant an external intervention. Remember, in the DRC Congo, to kick out the M23 movement, a movement that was really well equipped, that has occupied a territory bigger than Burundi, the United Nations has sent only 3,000 troops to kick them out. 3,000 from South Africa and Tanzania. How come people can think to send 5,000 troops in a peaceful land like Burundi only because Rwanda and some other countries are trying to sell a negative, bad narrative of genocide that cannot exist in Burundi, where the army and the police have 50% each of Hutu and 50% of Tutsi, where we've found a solution to the problem of ethnic divisions. So, no, we cannot accept the deployment of those 5,000 troops in Burundi because until now, the army and the police have been able to protect the civilians, have been able to protect the country. All the attackers have been defeated within 2 days. So now, we cannot allow them to bring in external forces, but based on wrong narrative and rumors of a genocide that is being prepared or going on.
Okay, now let's talk about Rwanda. On December 14th, the NGO Refugees International reported that Rwanda is recruiting and in some cases forcibly conscripting Burundian refugees to fight in a new Burundian rebel army, and that they're training in both Rwanda, on Burundi's northern border, and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, on its western border. Militarizing a refugee camp is a violation of international law, as is aggression across the borders of a sovereign nation. And nothing could be a greater crime against peace in Burundi. But neither the U.S. nor EU officials who pushed and paid for these talks, nor the African Union, nor the UN Security Council have acknowledged this, even though it's impossible that they don't know about it. And members of the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the United States have acknowledged it. The silence about this is giving the reports from these Kampala talks an air of unreality. If they're not going to talk about that, how can these talks possibly be about peace in Burundi?
Okay, thank you. Let me start by a speech from Mr. Richard Sezibera, who is Secretary General of the East African Community, Rwandese, during the launching ceremony of the Burundi talks. He said that the East African Community supports the decision from the African Union Peace and Security Department to send in Burundi troops to prevent a genocide. I don't object to him as a Rwandese, but to the fact that he did not even mention in a single word or sentence that his country of origin, Rwanda, is violating international law by recruiting and training refugees in order to disturb the peace in Burundi. He said nothing about it. I found this very strange. He often repeated that Burundi was at the crossroads, under fire, and that it was needed the troops being sent there to stop the killings. He ignored that the main source of evil is Rwanda. So Burundi, we are trying to emphasize the fact that our peace is being disturbed by elements coming from Rwanda, equipped by Rwanda, trained by Rwanda. But now we hope that the international community can take sanctions against this country and even send those troops that they are trying to send in Burundi in Rwanda to prevent the recruitment and to prevent those training Burundi refugees.
Just to give the audience an idea of how unreasonable this is, one only has to ask, okay, if these 5,000 African Union peacekeepers come in, are they going to get between Rwanda's new rebel army, quote unquote, and the Burundian army? It might actually make some sense if the UN Security Council, which would have to approve this African Union troop deployment to make it lawful, said that it was sending troops to stop Rwanda's grave violation of Burundi's national sovereignty. But the African Union Peace and Security Council hasn't even acknowledged all the credible evidence from UN officials and the independent NGO Refugees International that Rwanda is violating Burundi's national sovereignty. And you, meaning Burundi, you yourself have 7,000 African Union peacekeepers in some of the hottest conflict zones in Africa, in Mali, Somalia, and the Central African Republic. Are you going to have to bring your peacekeepers home to protect the nation from Rwanda, or from 5,000 more peacekeepers with an unreasonable mandate?
We don't need that because even now we have a request from the African Union to provide more troops that will be deployed in other countries, and Burundi has agreed to. So we are not taking them back home since we are sending other soldiers outside the country. The Burundi army and police have proved to be professional, and we have never been defeated. We had an attack from the DRC. It was in January 2015. The attackers have been defeated within 2 days. We went through a quartet. It was in May. Within a few hours, we were able to defeat them and restore the peace in the country. We got another attack from Rwanda. It was in July. The army had defeated the attackers in 2-3 days, and all the weapons have been seized. And even the attack of the beginning of December. So that proves that Burundi army and police don't need any other external force to come and help, because they can protect the borders of Burundi, the citizens of Burundi, and the integrity of the territory of Burundi.
Willy Nyamitwe, you've stayed up very late at night there to talk to us from a distant time zone. So I want to let you go get some sleep. But first, I want to thank you for learning English to be able to talk to us. I know that it's at least your third language, with Kirundi being your first and French, the language of Belgian colonizers, being your second. Thank you for that, and thank you for speaking to Project Censored.
I thank you, and really, I wish you a Happy New Year.
That was Willy Nyamitwe, Communications Advisor to Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza. I'm Ann Garrison, and I want to close on a note that we didn't have time to hit earlier. Anyone who searches the web for the name of Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza will find innumerable sensational diatribes about what a human rights abusing, genocide plotting tyrant he is. One constant complaint against the president is that he's repressing the press in Burundi. And the outlet most often mentioned is Radio Publique Africaine. This is or was a private radio station calling itself African Public Radio. In May, it invited Renegade General Godfrey Niyombare onto its airwaves to announce that he had just led a successful coup d'etat and that the president had been deposed. That proved false, and the government then moved to shut down Radio Publique Africaine. This inspired outrage from human rights crusaders, including Reporters Without Borders. I'm still trying to imagine the radio station in any nation on earth that could do the same and stay on the air. Happy New Year. Thanks for listening to the Project Censored show. Thanks again to Mickey and Peter for inviting me to guest host. They'll be back next week.